funding right now, which is probably, this is a worse fundraising environment than it was in '09, if you can believe that. And it's the same kind of thing. It's like you'll hear all the excuses, and it's just, can you get somebody that believes in your mission and is willing to take the leap with you?
Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit, and I can fast forward it because I kind of came into the story at this point. I joined the company, which was later renamed from Statsheet to Automated Insights. And Automated Insights started automating content across a wide variety of domains, not just sports, but we did financial recaps for the Associated Press that were automated about earnings reports. We did fantasy football, which is sports, but that was a notable one, Yahoo Fantasy Football. I think we did stuff for the Orlando Magic kind of ticket holders through their email, and basically anything where you had numbers that were backing up or any kind of systematic way that you might think of as writing something, we were able to automate it. And what I tell people now is, we didn't have the language to describe it at the time, but what I tell people now is that it's kind of like an earlier version of ChatGPT, or a version that maybe people had more control over, but still felt just as magical, as if a machine was writing from your data in the same way that a human would. So this was in like 2013, 14, 15, way before ChatGPT or LLMs or AI was ever in the discussion, but we were doing that kind of content. And then the company got acquired. Talk to me about, since we're talking about feelings, talk to me about the feeling of that moment. Was that the moment? First of all, some people don't start a company to get acquired. They just want to run the company forever. So was getting acquired your goal the whole time? And so talk to me about, like, was that your goal, and how did it feel if it was to achieve that?
So as an entrepreneur, like for me, one of the biggest things that I focus on is optionality. And what I mean by that is, being an entrepreneur is very difficult. There's lots of challenges and all of that. I think it's also the best job in the world, even with those challenges. But you have to be nimble. And what that translates into is you can't be too stuck on one path, because the environment changes. Again, 2 years ago, it was probably the easiest fundraising environment ever, maybe, and now it's one of the hardest ever, and it's just like 2 years later, right? And so you have to be nimble and change. And so I believe in optionality, fundamentally, as an entrepreneur. What does that mean? It means that you don't get stuck in your ways with any one path, and that you're flexible based on what's going on around you to navigate, the company and pursue other options as they come up. And so, when it comes to like, what was my long-term aspirations with the company, it was to have a successful company, to make it as big as absolutely possible. I also had this, notion that I never quite understood why the best companies in the world or the biggest companies in the world are, when they talk about big companies, oftentimes that translates into number of employees. I always thought, you could probably have a super successful company that didn't have that many employees. Now we're going to start to see that in spades, I think, with AI, but that was also kind of the goal, is how big of a company can we make with as few employees as possible? Because I think ultimately, as these companies get so big, there's all sorts of inefficiencies that get built in that you just can't avoid as a big company. So anyway, when it comes to, when we had a number of different offers along the way. At one point I was offered, ESPN tried to acquire me, and they wanted to put me on TV and be the stats guy on ESPN, and they came to me and said, this is our offer, and there's the ESPN tax that's associated with it. And I went, what do you mean the ESPN tax? I was like, well, we can't pay you as much as you might get from another company that acquires you, but that's because we're ESPN. So I was like, well, first, I got a face for radio, so like I never intended to be on TV. I never, I'm sure that works a lot for other people, but that just...
I would have taken that deal so quickly.
You would have been all over that.
Jumped on that.
For me, I was like, I don't care anything about that, and this tax doesn't sound good. So that was a non-starter. But anyway, we'd have these different, companies come up, and most of the time when you have overtures from somebody that wants to acquire your company, they don't go anywhere. It's, either they're just sniffing around for information, or they'll give you a lowball deal or whatever. So over the years, I like a lot of entrepreneurs, when you get that first company that says, hey, we're kind of interested in your company, would you be interested in selling? You're like, you instantly go to, all right, now we're talking mansions, how much do Lamborghinis cost? And, tell my wife, and, we start having these dreams, and then, wow, just imagine if we get this kind of money. and then nothing happens, and the acquisition doesn't happen, and you're like, honey, sorry, that's not going to happen. And it's like, but we were just looking up, how much it would cost to live in this neighborhood. I was like, yeah, it's not going to happen.
That's not too unlike, I think, people who maybe are entrepreneurs for the first time and just selling anything. So if you get that first kind of sniff from someone, or even someone literally tells you, I want to buy what you are selling, assuming it's not an immediate transaction, but a larger transaction, you get really excited, but then you realize you have to do a lot of those conversations. For one person who says that, there's a long journey between then and when they actually buy. So it's just the same with buying a company, just a kind of a different scale. But you have to kind of experience that for a while to realize you should lower your expectations for any given person who says excitedly that they want to buy you or your company or your stuff.
Yeah, and that's why I coach entrepreneurs now that assume it's not going to happen until you sign the documents. And it's hard to not get wrapped up into these things. I took it so far that when we actually did get acquired, I didn't tell my wife until the very end. And so, we get this offer, we signed a letter of intent, we go through diligence. This was over a Christmas of 2014. My wife even at one point says, all right, so what's going on? You're talking to your attorney all the time. There's something must be up. What's going on? I was like, just business stuff. And I remember, so the deal was, in startup world, it takes 3 months, 4 months to typically go through an acquisition. And so this whole time I hadn't told my wife at all. Not even that somebody we're talking to somebody, right? Because we'd been through this so many times. I was like, I remember telling her at one point, I was like, all right, next time I'm going to let you know on the day it's done. I'm not going to tell you. She's like, okay, fine. And so now, fast forward to 2014, we're doing this, and the deal's happening. I come to work one day in a full suit, and again, this is normally how I dress. I don't wear suits that often, but I come to work in a full suit. We have a company meeting, announcement. We've just been acquired, right? I still hadn't told my wife. So the company knew before my wife knew. But that night, we had scheduled to go to dinner, and it was over dinner that I was like, all right, just let you know, we've been acquired. And so it was a bit of a shock to her, but she was like the last to know. But for me, it was all about optionality. Like this was, people were like, well, Robbie, was it hard to get rid of your baby? And I was like, I don't look at it that way. Like, to me, this is, my career is a fluid thing over time, to be honest. And, maybe it's not that controversial, but I believe that most people should, if you want to progress in your career and you want to continue to grow and learn, you should not be in the same position longer than 5 or 6 years, to be honest with you. I worked at Cisco 13 years. I think it was probably 7 years too long. I think there's a lot of atrophy that happens in your career once you're in a position for too long. You have network atrophy, and what I mean by that is you're just around the same people all the time. So, one day when, maybe if you get laid off or something happens, you need to leave, and now you need to find another job, well, you're just kind of in the same circles you've been in for the last 10 years, and that's a small circle to try to help, for people to help you find another job. So you network atrophies, your skills atrophy, you're just working on especially this was for me in a big company, you're just like focused on a really niche thing. And then one day, if you want to leave that thing, again, you don't have a broad set of skills to rely on there. And so anyway, I'm a big believer that it's good to kind of constantly renew your career in a way. And so for me, the idea that we would sell after 5 years officially, it was more like 8 years that I've been working on. I was like, yep, that sounds about right. I mean, I certainly could have kept going, and that would have been fine with that too. But I've just seen too many entrepreneurs that had a good offer and they didn't get it, and then they never got another one. And so for me, it was, even though now if you look at what we built, it was really the first commercial generative AI company. This was before ChatGPT and all of that. We built the first one in 2010. And what would that be worth today? It would be interesting had we played that out, where that would be, but I have no regrets. I'm totally cool with that. It played out fine for me.
I mean, yeah, even the language to describe it didn't exist at the time. So in terms of how people would understand it, frame it, and use it, the world had to catch up to kind of some of the things we were thinking about then. I was on the marketing and communication side, and even the way we were positioning it and the way journalists were asking us questions about it with fear and trepidation reminds me a lot of how they write about it today. So did it feel like a smooth process to you then, getting acquired? Like, oh, yeah, it's about the next thing, and or is it like this gigantic leap in the air, fist pumping, like, yeah, we did it, and then you kind of came back to the stability? Like, if you could do a little EKG of your emotions, did you have a huge spike there, or was it just kind of like, all right, just kind of the end of a long marathon, you're happy to do it, but it kind of fit within your framework of what you were going to do?
Again, it's a little bit like when I became a distinguished engineer. And again, I don't want to make this sound like I'm not appreciative of what happened, or I'm not super fortunate. Again, I'm super thankful for everything that I've gotten, and super thankful that we were able to be acquired and all of that. But to me, the point of being acquired was very similar to the point of saying, hey, Robbie, you're now a distinguished engineer. It's like, okay, well, that was this end point. But really, if you remember, one of our values at Automated Insights was enjoy the journey, right? And so I baked that into the values of the company. And so for me, it was, and I look back, we just had such an amazing time with that company. That was I would take that 100 times over the point in time in which the acquisition was final. I get up in the suit, make the announcement and all that. So again, it's great, and I wish it for everybody, but it's also not, to me, the main thing that I look back on and think of the most fondly.
And we did have a fun company too. Back when being in the office was a thing, we had a ping pong table. Our office was overlooking the Durham Bulls arena, stadium, the DBAP, and that was a special time. Mm-hmm. We had a very interesting office culture, and people really participated in it. At what point, and maybe the answer to this question could be always, but did you have a point where you thought, even if it didn't feel like a huge emotional high, like, oh, now I am a success? Was there a point where you maybe thought, I'm getting to be a success, and then you cross the threshold and now I am a success? Or does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that goes along with being acquired, and one of the reasons that an entrepreneur may consider it. Even if, again, I coach entrepreneurs now, and some that may be looking at acquisitions that aren't financially meaningful, but just to be able to, it's their first one, and they can say that they had a successful first startup. That does go a ways, in the community. Like, you want to go do your next company, it's a little bit easier to start the second one and raise money in the second one once you've had a successful first one. And so it is a little bit of a balancing act of like, well, what's more important to you, kind of continuing on with the thing you got going, or getting a win under your belt.
Did getting that win make it easier to do anything?
No. Maybe hiring, but it wasn't even the win. It was, the hiring people that I worked with before was, I think, mostly, and you should answer this one, mostly about the environment that we had built with the previous companies, not necessarily the result that we had. Right. But I'm curious, I don't think that you joined the next startup just because we had a good exit.
No, but if the company had totally flamed out, I might not have worked with you again. Right? We had a successful run together, and you proved to me, I didn't really think of it in these terms, but now that you're asking me to consider it, you proved to me that you could build a company and take it in a good direction. So, yeah, I would say that was probably helpful in my decision to join the next one.
Well, then let's push this back on you now. You've asked me a bunch of questions.
Uh-huh.
So, why did you join the first one then? Because there wasn't, I was not a proven entrepreneur at that point.
No, I didn't know you. I came in through another employee. I think I was freelancing for a while, and I was looking for a job, and I saw the job description and it seemed to fit my criteria. I was looking for a smaller company, something in tech. I had been in journalism and then marketing and then kind of tech-oriented marketing a little bit, so I think I was drawn towards a startup for that reason, something a bit more adventurous. But also, and I had a relationship with that other employee, Joe Procopio, who had written I had been writing articles for a website that he had called Exit Events. And so I knew him, and so I think his involvement probably drew me in as well, just having another kind of person that I knew involved in it. And then I visited the office, which was the previous office before the Durham Bulls office, and it was kind of this frat house vibe, kind of a sports heavy thing. I'm not even that big of a sports fan, really. I'm just a sports liker, not like a huge sports fan. I don't know. I wasn't prepared to answer questions today. I'm just asking them.